people spent a lot more time with each other. Neighbors would be outside and interact with each other, and humans used to have a lot more time looking at each other. And then things started to change with the internet and cable TV in the 90s. And then, there's a study done just before the smartphones came out that said people spend a full 20 minutes a day just looking at their phones. And people said, man, that's such a big problem. They redid the exact same study. It's a naturalistic study where you study people actually in their offices in the world. And they said the same study repeated shows now people are looking at their phones 5 hours and 18 minutes a day. So,
right.
And here's the key is for those 5 hours and 18 minutes, we're not looking at each other's faces.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the NOLA Catholic Men's Podcast. I'm David Warren, and on today's episode, our director Chris O'Neill sits down with psychologist and faithful Catholic, Dr. Tim Hogan. Dr. Tim has a lot to say about the influence of technology on our mental and spiritual, and yes, even our physical well-being. Who knew that using technology and looking at screens and not talking with human beings in person could affect our limbic nervous system? Anyway, I think you'll enjoy the show, and if you do, then be sure to hear Dr. Tim in person at our February 24th men's conference happening at St. Catherine of Siena Church in Metairie, Louisiana on February 24th. That's just a couple of weeks away. Now, there's still time to learn more about the conference and to register at nolacatholicmen.com. So if you enjoy what you hear of Tim on the podcast today, then be sure to register to hear him in person. Anyway, without further ado, let's sit back and enjoy the conversation.
Dr. Hogan, thanks for meeting with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. I'm looking forward to talking with you now and looking forward to being with you at the conference.
Yeah. So maybe I think a lot of guys probably don't really know who you are or what you're up to. So why don't you just give us a little bit of a background of, what you're up to, where you're coming from, who are you? And then we'll get into talking about, the conference and things.
Sounds great. Yeah. So I am a psychologist, work in the Detroit area, and I also teach at Sacred Heart Major Seminary. I teach pastoral counseling to the guys who are going to be ordained in the spring. And until a couple of years ago, I was running a large Christian counseling center in the city of Detroit, in kind of a rough neighborhood in Detroit. We had 12 therapists and had just a real exciting ministry. So that's and my whole life and passion. My dissertation and my doctorate 30 years ago was in integrating theology and spirituality along with good psychology. So the question is, as you and I were talking before we went on, just, what does it look like to be created in God's image? Like, how does that affect the way we understand what it means to be a person and what we long for? And what does it mean to be a man and a woman and a human? And so that's kind of been my passion all along. That's been my writing. More recently, I wrote a book about culture called The Gift of Cultural Hurricanes. It's about understanding how technology is changing our brain, our relationships, and the way we connect with God. So, so that's kind of my passion. I feel pretty fortunate to get to do what I do.
Yeah, that's really great because I mentioned to you when we were talking before, my background is in philosophy and theology, but I've always had kind of a side interest in psychology because what we understand from our tradition about what it means to be human corresponds with what we find out when we look at human behavior or human biology. And, the theology of the body has us focused on, the significance of the bodily dimension of ourselves. And that includes, in a lot of ways, our psychology, the structures of our brains and how we act and how we move in this world. So yeah, it's like, I'm really excited to be able to chat with you because your area of expertise is an area that I'm very interested in, and it's close to the stuff that I've been talking to, and I think it'll be a real benefit for the guys at the conference too to hear what you're saying. So I think so what I want to just touch a little bit on your book, The Cultural Hurricanes, and just the general idea of how emotionally and psychologically our cultural environment has changed with the advent of digital media and internet, high-speed internet, all of that, and how and we're not adapted or attuned to that environment, and that causes some challenges for us. Can you just put a few markers about that and give us a
Well, yeah, I
few
think
insights there?
one of the big things is, as you know, I mean, I when I was growing up, we would just people spent a lot more time with each other. You know, neighbors would be
Yeah.
outside and interact with each other, and humans used to have a lot more time looking at each other. And then things started to change with the internet and cable TV in the 90s. And then, there's a study done just before the smartphones came out that said people spend a full 20 minutes a day just looking at their phones. And people said, man, that's such a big problem. They redid the exact same study. It's a naturalistic study where you study people actually in their offices in the world. And they said the same study repeated shows now people are looking at their phones 5 hours and 18 minutes a day. So,
Right.
here's the key is for those 5 hours and 18 minutes, we're not looking at each other's faces. And the only way humans can relate, anywhere from 70 to 92% of our communication is non-verbally. So when you lose 70 to 90% of the information you're getting from other people, of course, we're going to be more anxious and we're going to be less secure in our relationships and we're going to be more polarized politically because we just don't get each other. We fear each other more than we know each other. And it's also, of course, triggered this big loneliness epidemic is that we don't understand why we're so lonely. We're on our phone texting all day. And that's because our nervous system is not getting the soothing nonverbal communication from other people. And so I think this is something I think we're slowly waking up to, but technology advanced super quickly and we're just now understanding the impact on our nervous systems.
Yeah. That's a big part of reason why we chose this theme for the men's conference of friendship is because I mean, on one hand, you can feel like, oh, I'm connected to so many people. I'm communicating with so many people. I have, I can listen to the ideas and thoughts of, lots and lots. I can go on the internet and find anything I want. And yet I feel very lonely and isolated and it's confusing. It's a confusing experience to feel on the one hand, so connected and on the other hand, so disconnected. And you brought this up very clearly that it's becoming clearer, and maybe you can explain this a little bit better, but it's becoming clearer that loneliness is becoming such a ubiquitous experience, and it seems connected to many, many other problems and difficulties that people are experiencing. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I think, first the data, and the data is that there was a big study comparing men in the 90s, early 1990 actually is when it was published, and now, and probably the best summary of that is we are about 500% more lonely today than we were just 30 years ago. And whether you count number of friends, how many people have, 6 friends that they can trust, how many people have 1 person they can trust, like, we've just really become more isolated. And some of this isn't hard to understand. I don't know about you, Chris, but for me, you get home after a long day at work, you have dinner with your family, and it's like, oh, there's neighbors out there cutting their grass. I could go out and cut the grass and have a conversation with them. Or I could go online and find out how, whatever, how LSU did. And,
sit on the couch and watch a film. Yeah.
No, it's so tough. There's so much dopamine waiting for us with our TVs or computer screens that it's as simple as that. We tend to not go out and engage people. We tend to try and find, what we can. And it's not all bad. This isn't technology's bad. Technology's great. You and I know that. We've talked about that. I got a god kid in Alaska who runs rafting trips, and she and I can talk on Zoom, which is amazing. Otherwise, we'd lose touch.
We're doing this right now.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, it's good, but yes, it's I think so. So we're real lonely, and here's the other big thing that I think is important. This isn't just about our psychological and emotional health, although it is. It's also about our physical health. And you may remember the Surgeon General and about 8 years ago was studying the usual things Surgeon Generals study, like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, violent deaths, opioid addictions. And he actually said, as he started looking at the data, he saw what he called the dark thread that link all of these things together. And the dark thread is loneliness, because when people are lonely, bad things happen to our nervous system. And guys will hear more about this when at the conference, like bad things happen to our nervous system, to our limbic system. And when that happens, we get more inflammation. And so truly loneliness makes you sick. Loneliness kills people. Yeah. It's not. Yeah, I mean, it's real. The data is real clear that that's the case. And so that's why he came at this and said, we need to get people back together. We don't join bowling leagues. We don't go to the Ushers Club meeting. We just don't do it like we used to. And I guess just to finish that thought, I mean, this is where, as church, it's so beautiful, because you look at what do we do as church, and I think about that at our church all the time. Like, we gather, like it's important that we come together in men's groups, to sit in a group. I don't know how many thousands of men's groups I've been at, where you sit around, you just share life sometimes, and you just,
Yeah.
it's so crucial to our physical health that we spend time with each other.
You know, it makes me think of a corollary. You know, one time John Paul II very famously, he was talking about pornography, and he said that the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much, but that it shows too little. That, you know, that it kind of separates one aspect of the human person from the whole richness of the human person. And that's a really interesting way to think about the problem. Like, it's a different thing to interact with a real whole person than just one dimension of them. And, you know, and I think, you know, he wasn't thinking about social media like we have now, but I do think a lot of these experiences have that same effect. It kind of, you know, people are looking at me and looking at you on a screen or listening to us on a podcast, and we're speaking what we think is true and helpful, but they're only seeing like a fraction of the richness of who I am. They're not seeing me, you know, I've got my hair nice and I'm wearing my jacket and my lighting is correct, and, you know, and I'm in a good mood. You're not seeing me just grouchy. You don't see me losing my temper. You don't see me, you know, sad or depressed or down. Like, you don't see all of those things. You have to actually be in the same room with the person to be able to see them as a person, and not just, you know, one dimension of that. And so
that's beautiful, Chris.
But it fools you into thinking that you see the whole thing. Like, we actually think we know the people that we're seeing online, but it's a whole entirely different experience of being actually in the room.
Absolutely. No, that's so good. That is so good. I think that's so true. And it's so easy for us. I imagine if I say something really stupid on this, you could edit it out. You could be like, let's not ruin this. We don't want guys to stay away from the conference just because he said that thing about whatever, about LSU stealing Brian Kelly from Notre Dame or whatever. You know?
Right.
I am a Notre Dame fan. You know, but we do, and we what do they call that? There's a word for it. But we kind of craft. We present an image that's all us. But, you know, when you're in a men's group with people, and I was in one men's group, the longest I've been is 8 years with a bunch of guys, and you really get to know them. You know, you go through deaths. I mean, while we were in that group, one of our guys died. He had got cancer and died, and we were all there. You know, we took turns sitting with them, and then. I mean, that you get to know the reality of people. You get to know what everyone's kids are going through. And, you know, I mean, people look at me like, oh, Dr. Hogan and my kids on the outside, they look great. Like, they have no idea, like, some of what things we've been through. And it's like every bit as difficult and dark as any family I know. And I am on a level playing field with everybody. I just don't think there's good guys and bad guys, and good Catholics and bad Catholics. I mean, we're all trying. Let me.
So this is something that's been it's been bouncing around in my head, and I just want you to tell me what you think about this. Is that, you know, one of the reasons why that happens? Like, if I'm watching something on, you know, I'm watching a talk or a lecture or a podcast or something online, and the person starts saying something that annoys me or something that I think is dumb or not correct or whatever, I can just turn that off or change. Like, I don't want to listen to this and move on to something else. Whereas if I were on the pastoral council in my parish, or I'm in my men's group, and someone in the room starts saying something stupid or annoying or frustrating, like, it's a lot harder to just walk out of the room. Right. And so, you know, being actually in the presence of physically in the presence of other people means willingly exposing yourself to that discomfort. You know, and I think we have to try to figure out how to say that that's valuable.
Oh, man.
Or that's worthwhile.
And it's so subtle. What you're talking about is, and I do that. Like, if I'm on social media and I start listening, I'm like, oh, I know who they are. I don't keep listening. It's like natural. Not only that, but, you know, the way algorithms work, you know, whatever you watch, and you just get more of the same. You know, if I like this person for president, I get more stuff on that political spectrum. If I like this person, I mean, if two people who voted for someone different Google the very same question, they're going to get different answers. You know,
Yeah.
Our music, if we like certain kinds of music, it'll say, why don't you
It's
try this?
curated
Why don't
for
you try
us.
this? And it
Yeah.
narrows us. But then, I was at we have our St. Vincent de Paul group, which I help out with at our church. And I was at the Christmas party, and I'm talking to these people, and I'm like, wow, like a bunch of y'all voted for someone that I didn't vote for. And yet here we are, just totally savoring community. Like, but yet we're in this together, and yet we help people together, and we all, and it sounds cliche, but we're all about Christ. Like, we're all about bringing love into the world.
Yeah.
We're all about bringing, anywhere we go, we just want to bring the kingdom. We just want to make life a little better for people. And we share that in common. And that's so much bigger than what you see on the news. Like, we should hate each other. Like, we should not trust each other, but we don't. We love each other, and we tease each other. And so, I think church has never been, and this is chapter 9 of the book, but church has never been more important than now, I think, in culture, because of how we're splitting apart. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I agree with that. It's both the blessing and the curse about the church, because people don't want to interact with the church because the people at the church X, the people that I see there are these kinds of people, or that, or they don't, or Father doesn't, or I just don't want to be, or it's uncomfortable, or whatever. But that's exactly what the church offers, right? It offers the communion with an actual person. I mean, I think it's a pretty beautiful insight of the wisdom of the church that the church has always rejected abstracted sacraments. Like when the telephone was invented, way back when the telephone was first invented, there was a whole question, can we do confession over the phone?
Oh,
and the church rejected that. Like, no, like you have to be, you've got to hear the voice, or like when you're at mass, like the physical voice of the priest is what confects the Eucharist. And, being physically present with Christ in the Eucharist there's a value there that gets lost when it gets filtered through a medium. And the church had that wisdom, like when did the phone get invented? Like, hundreds of years ago.
Isn't that true?
And we can't reconcile with the person that we're not in the same room with. Like, it's difficult to do that. I agree.
I also find, Chris, I don't know if you find this, but I think people are much harder to deal with through texting, or, certainly in the Twitterverse or whatever you call it now. Like, that's where people just say the worst things and the meanest things. I made a mistake one time of posting one thing that had a political feel. It wasn't even a direct political thing. And people that I love were just so cruel to me about what I had posted. And it was like, I was saying something positive about a person I like. I wasn't even like, and they were, so whereas when we're with each other, like, I find when I'm actually with people, even people I disagree with, it is so much easier in person. Now, it does get uncomfortable, but I still find it easier because there's a humanity. There's something that reminds us that we are part of something bigger than the two of us. I don't know. I don't know. Humility, something. It's easier in person.
Yeah. I mean, it's easier and harder.
Yeah.
There's a part of it that's easy and part of that that's hard. I mean, I think when we're talking about, say, the men's conference or a retreat or a men's group or something like that, I mean, you might say, I know I'd like to have more friends, or maybe I feel kind of lonely, or I feel like I wish I had someone to talk to, but I don't know who's going to be in that group. I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what they're going to be like. I don't want to take I don't want to take the risk of going over there and getting involved. And then whenever I do, it's sure enough going to happen that somebody there is going to annoy you. I mean, that's just, like, that's definitely, especially if you're an introverted kind of guy, so it ends up becoming a fulfilled prophecy. But you don't hang in there long enough to see that fruit of that. Like Jason Angelette, in his podcast, when I was talking with him, he was talking about, that iron sharpens iron idea from the Psalms, but that, in order for that to happen, the iron they have to kind of grind together. They have to hit, in order for that honing to occur, that sharpening and that clarity and if we're not there, if we stay apart, then that no one's getting sharpened.
No, that's a great image, because rather than iron sharpening iron, it's so much easier, like you said, to just go to the next whatever, only listen to the podcast that I know I'm going to agree with. And I think the men's conference does give us a chance to get together and realize not everyone's just like us, but sometimes that person out there, when I was in college, I love this quote that all growth is the integration of the seemingly opposite. And so sometimes it takes someone that you're like, oh, I so disagree with you. For me now, it's like, all right, roll up my sleeves. There's something you got that I probably need because you bugged the heck out of me. So I want to figure out if, so yes, I think, but then also, I don't know, I had this experience when I was, my daughter and I, we summited the Grand Teton, and she was big into rock climbing. I got into it long enough to not die on climbing these rocks with all the ropes and everything. And it was the most terrifying thing I ever did. I can tell you some stories, but it includes language that wouldn't be appropriate for a Catholic podcast. But when we were going, you leave at 2 a.m. You in the camp, you break camp at 2 a.m. You leave because you got to get up to the summit and back down before noon because the storms come in. And so the first 3 hours are in the dark, and you have those headlamps, kind of marking out. So you're constantly looking right and left to make sure you're not going to fall off a cliff, kind of thing. But the coolest thing about that was when we were going up, there were groups coming from different directions, and you watched all these like strings of light weaving their way up to get to the place where you then have to climb the cliff. And I just thought, this is so beautiful. This is life. This is God. Like, we're all on different paths, and we're not going to have 100% agreement. We're not going to all agree and emphasize the same ways of being Catholic. We're all Catholic, but I'm part of a parish. We got people that love adoration. They're always at adoration, and I love them. And then we got people who are like going down to Central America again to take care of a clinic that we all support down there, but they don't go to adoration. But we're all like, we're doing it, man. We're all in, and we love each other. But it can be threatening when we don't spend enough time together. We can feel like those other Catholics are whatever.
Yeah. It's that, the body's made of different parts. And the eye can't say to the hand, I don't need you. Yeah. But the eye and the hand and they remain different. It's not like, this is one of the issues too, is that a lot of times when we talk about issues like diversity in our culture, we a lot of times there's resistance to thinking about that for good reason, because it seems like, we have to have our minds so open that our brains fall out or something like that, right? Sure. Whereas, being able to listen or attend to that difference doesn't mean that I give up what I know or it's not like the adoration person needs to stop going to adoration and start going to Peru. That's not what's necessary, right? It's not that we give up our different places or our differences or the things that we see or different temperaments. Like in fact, what we know and what we think actually becomes clearer, the role or the place or the position, where I stand becomes clearer when I'm interacting with others. Yes. And it doesn't mean I give up my place. It means that I interact in a relationship.
Well, and Chris, I got to speak at the Gulf Coast Conference, I don't know what it was, 5 years ago or something. And I remember walking through the exhibits there and seeing you get the Catholic worker folks there, and you had the new orders that were there, and the women in the full habits, with no hair or anything showing, and you walk through there. My first thought was, oh my gosh, is this all one church? Like these people are so different. And then when it was time for Mass, I was sitting up in the back and watching representatives all come in, following the cross, and I just thought, how cool is this? That God, who is beyond our understanding, just manifests presence in such different people, and yet we all bring the kingdom, and we're all bringing it in a different way. And in fact, when I started my keynote that day, I said, I'm pretty sure some of you guys are thinking that not everyone in this room is going to heaven. Am I right? And people laugh because that's our thought. It's like, y'all are the problem in the church, but the truth is that is so amazing that God can do that. And so why would a guy come to this conference? Hopefully you'd go and find that where you are is absolutely fine. And the real question, as Pope Francis would say, is, what's that?
And necessary. Like where you are is necessary.
Yes. And Pope Francis's favorite quote, and he said it many ways, or not his favorite quote, my favorite quote of Pope Francis, and he said it in different ways, is he prefers the realities of life to theories. And it's like, so start with the reality of who you are. Look at what God has done for you. Relax. God is at work in your life. And then what's the next step to become more free, to become more passionate, to become more loving? Like that's how this works. But I think, and this is part of the this wonderful new social media world, we get caught in this mind state of comparing and despairing. You know, we think other people are holy, or other people think they're holy, or like, and we're comparing all these highlight reels to the, you know, the everyday,
Right.
ordinary life. And so we think we're going to go to a men's conference and feel like we're not enough. And it's just the opposite. Like, I think people who
Right.
come are going to realize they're more than enough. And how exceptional and how countercultural
Yep.
to show up at an event. No, people don't do that anymore. You know, people don't gather
Yeah.
anymore. That's what sociologists
You know
are
what?
saying. It's crazy. Yeah.
It occurs to me, and I want to talk a little bit about this idea of being confused about masculinity and
Yes.
the value of masculinity in our culture. That's a big issue. But it occurs to me, another analogy that you could look to is sort of like the military. You know, like the military has all these different branches. You know, the Air Force and the Navy and the Army, and they razz each other, and they're rivals with each other. And sometimes you just feel like they really hate each other, but you know, they know that they just serve different functions and they have different roles. And when it comes down to it, what makes the United States military force so impressive is exactly the capacity to coordinate. That that you have all of these different, very different skill sets and different temperaments and different ideas, all being able to concentrate into a single, mission or something.
Yeah.
And that's what we need in the church too. It's like, so the Jesuits and the Benedictines and the Dominicans, they all kind of razz each other, and they all kind of point fingers at each other. But, there's a way in which among men, the competition that we have with each other, the one-upmanship can be done in a sportsman-like way. It can be done and not as a tearing each other down, but each person bringing what they have and showing your stuff, and then coordinating and collectivizing it. So, sometimes that competition, we sometimes in the church try to avoid conflict or competition, or because we've seen so many examples of bad conflict and bad competition.
Yes.
And not like positive, friendly competition. And so then guys want someone to wrestle with, guys want someone to fight with, or to arm wrestle with. And then when we don't have that opportunity, sometimes we feel like it's not a place for us. So maybe
like a place that's reasonably safe to spar a little bit. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. To spar. Let's have, like, none of us like the divisiveness of the political conversation right now, and none of us, but oftentimes we feel like I just don't even have an environment where I can actually talk it through and wrestle it out and puzzle it out, because it just becomes nasty and ugly before we've had a chance to talk or think it through. And that's it. I think that a big way that the church can help us be healthy in that way is to give us a physical space to actually be in the place with a set of ground rules, right?
Totally,
Where we can kind of spar with each other. Like, God doesn't seem to be worried about infighting within the Catholic Church. He doesn't seem to ever have. That's always been happening since the beginning, and it's still happening.
And it went on with Jesus in his day with the religious counterparts. So I think what you're saying is, don't worry. Like, we don't need to get overly concerned about that. But how great to gather. Expect that you might have your feathers ruffled or whatever a little bit. But more than anything, like, I think the value of men's groups for me is to finally have a place where you can come in and say, man, I struggle with this. And another guy says, yeah, me too. You too? I had a friend, a men's group that used to do these weekend intensive retreats, which were great, which I was a part of for many years. And they, the way it started was 4 guys said, man, we're just not growing in our faith. We need to go. So they said, we're going to rent a house. We're going to go for a weekend. We're just going to put it on the table and say, what do we need to grow? And as they got there, they got to the house they were staying at. They couldn't get in right away or something. So they're sitting in the car. And the one guy says, hey, you know what? Before I even go in, now this was 20 years ago, right after high-speed internet hit and everything became immediately available online. He said, I just got to say this before I go in. Guys, I got stuck. I've been looking at porn. I'm so ashamed of it. That's the number one thing I hope I can figure out, because I just am embarrassed that I'm a man, leadership in the church, and I look at porn. And the guy next to him's like, me too. And then the 2 guys in the back side were like, Me too.
Me
Me
yeah,
too.
exactly. Yeah.
And they're like, all right, well, that's one thing we're going to talk about is how can we
Right.
figure out how to get our, because, if you remember when high-speed internet first came out and you could do 2 clicks and be looking at the most insane, stimulating stuff ever, it makes sense that most guys are from. But anyway, the point is they got together. They've been holding this stuff silent. I know in my men's group over and over, I lost it with my wife. Can you believe I said this to my kid? And everyone's like, oh,
Right.
yeah, I've done that. And then you realize,
Yeah.
maybe I'm not as bad as I thought. And we
Yeah.
support each other. And then we pray for each other at the end. And it's like, well, that's pretty amazing. Like to find grace with other guys. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, we sometimes that curating, online curating makes us feel like we need to curate even when I do go to church, I fussing at your kids, like behave and, people are going to see you. And especially here in New Orleans, the social, like we have such a rich social life here. There's also in certain places, there's like a lot of pressure to kind of, look like you've got your act together and to be able to have a place where you don't have your act together and be okay with that. I mean, there's mercy in the church, right? And there's forgiveness. And like, what's the point of why would we need forgiveness if we were able to keep ourselves completely in line all the time?
Absolutely. No, it really is. When you can have that experience. And I think we talk about the church being a hospital for sinners, rather than a museum for saints or whatever that is. I find that being in a small group and even coming to something like this, like the men's conference, gives you a chance to normalize what it's like to be a man today.
Actual guy.
Yeah. And like, I think you and I've talked about, you look at, again, sociologists talk about what's happening to the meaning of masculinity today. And wasn't that long ago that guys the world needed our strength, our testosterone. We needed to be fierce fighters. We needed to protect our families and,
to go in the mind and dig the coal, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And now someone's sitting at a computer. I know here in Detroit with the auto industry, a lot of those heavy jobs, guys used to lift 100 pounds at a time and put it on the car. Now, because they don't want to pay for workers' comp, all those have been translated to robots. And so now a guy sits at a screen and a robot picks up the 100-pound part and puts it on the engine. So, and in the military, it used to be a lot of hand-to-hand combat. That's getting less and less the norm. And so now you got people sitting behind a screen. And by the way, women, because their brains develop faster, men in school, a first grade girl's got a full year of development on a boy just because of the way the brain develops. And that doesn't end, which is why there's 70% of valedictorians are now girls. And so the world is kind of skewed against men feeling like we're succeeding and we have our role. And I think, again, like you were saying, that's why we come back as a church and we're like, you know what? The church has been thinking about masculinity and femininity for a long time. And we've been evolving our understanding. And we have some insight. I mean, we're changing and we get some stuff wrong now and then, but we really have a rich tradition to draw from. You want to know what it means to be a man created in God's image? We're going to talk about that at this conference. I mean,
yeah.
And so that's important.
So let's maybe we could just put a little highlights on that. Like, what is distinctive? I think a lot of times too, the danger of having a men's conference is, the male female competition or one-upmanship, negative sense of competition. Like, we're what do we call that?
Like being
giving advantage to one side over the other, like it's a zero-sum game or something, right? Where there's only so much attention. If you give your attention to this area, that means there's something that you're not paying attention to. There's like a zero-sum game there or something. Instead of like, look, if we have strong, healthy, good, masculine, spirituality happening all over the diocese, it's not like a win for men is a lose for women. It's like a win-win.
Yes.
But a lot of times I find when we talk about masculinity or the value of masculinity from a Catholic perspective, we sometimes lose sight of the relationship to the woman or the relationship to the female. So, maybe we could talk about, what is it that what is unique about masculinity and what is it that, what is the value in the church or in society for men per se, especially in an environment where where the obvious things like just physical strength is less of an issue or less of a problem.
Well, and I think of the different ways we get to show up as men. for those of us who are married, that we do. That's a primary place. That's a sacramental space where we show up and ask for God's grace to, transform. But I think, I do think there's something about the archetype of a man as a warrior and a king who shows up to fight, who shows up with a fierceness. But it's a different kind of fierceness, who brings order to chaos. And women do it too, but men do it I think it's like music, like when you're hearing music, you probably know, you're from New Orleans. Ooh, that's good jazz. Whereas someone who's never heard jazz might be like, oh, that's interesting. Is that rock and roll country? Masculinity when you see it. So, when one of my kids was going through a super dark time and Saturday came and they were depressed, and I looked out in the backyard and I had this landscaping area that I just wanted to transform. I wanted to go attack the chaos, rip out the weeds, plant my new plants, water it, and then, sit back, have a beer and look at it and say, man, I did that, kind of like, just like God called me to.
Yeah.
I
Adam in the garden.
Chaos,
right.
What's that?
Yeah. Adam in the garden, right?
Yes, I subdued creation, but I knew that what was really needed was for me to go upstairs and get my kid and say, you want to go get breakfast? Because I knew they would, because the chaos in their life was what needed my presence as a man. And so there was a battle to fight. There was chaos that needed my fierceness, my strength, my initiation, but it needed it. I needed to engage the relational element. And so that was the challenge. It's a lot easier to go pull weeds and make my backyard look good than it is to engage an adolescent and listen and love and mirror and bring strength and bring encouragement. I mean, that's just hard. And I think that's one thing for me. It means have the fierceness to create space where relationship can thrive, and that's part of what it means to be a masculine man. And to not leave that up to women. A lot of times, a lot of families, the wives are the ones saying, we really need to go to church. We really shouldn't miss church again this week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As a man, to be like, have the strength to just say, if we're Catholic, we're going to mass on Sunday. Come on, guys, let's go. That's it. So I do think there's an initiating energy that is something that comes as men. We need to embrace that and ask God to strengthen that in us.
Yeah. So is it true? I mean, I think this is true anecdotally, but maybe from a psychological perspective, you can feel this out. But, it seems like, men have a unique capacity to live together and to coordinate their efforts together. Like, you can put a bunch of guys in a barracks and they can kind of figure it out. I mean, there's wrestling and tussling, but then, it's not just, your ability to bring force or bring power, but also to fit in and contribute cooperatively with other men. Whereas, my grandmother used to say, that there's not a roof big enough for two women. And that was a bit of a joke because because my mom and her mom, when they were making Thanksgiving dinner, they would kind of tussle in a way that it was like, look, it was just better if just one of them did it, because they had to kind of, whereas like guys can, there's it's not just your ability to apply force, but it's also your ability to like the camaraderie or the fraternity that allows you to join in together, that allows us to cooperatively bring order out of chaos instead of just
I think what you're saying is that there's something that seems to be in the DNA of men of being able to work together as a team, and like whether it's in the military or on a athletics team. Is that kind of what you're saying? I think there's great benefit in that. And I see that.
Or even a king. Even a king isn't a tyrant. A king, he sets the direction, but he needs the nobles and to willingly contribute to the goals of the king,
absolutely. Well, and we think of Christ the King. He was never a tyrant. He ordered very few people around. He had a way of showing up and having that kingly presence. And I think that's the ultimate goal as men. I don't think you can do it when you're 20. I think it takes learning and growing to know how to bring all that warrior energy, that kind of lover energy, that even priestly energy, even for those of us who are lay people, where we know how to create space so that good things can happen, so that people know, don't do that when he's in the room. Like, don't talk about that guy. Like, people know that there's a sense of goodness that we bring, and that's what kings do. They create kingdoms where people know that what is best and good and joyful is what is expected. And I think that's the goal as a man. For me, I want to walk into a room and bring that out of people. And it's kind of a Jesus-y kingship. It's not like a
to invite
Dictator.
the best to come out. I mean, it's easy. I mean, I think about my own life, and I have
Yeah.
daughters, and and seeing issues going on, and having the impetus to want to just lay down the law, and this is how it's going to be, and you will
Yeah.
do this. It's one thing to kind of force my kids to go to mass on Sunday, say,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's another thing to inspire in them a willingness to cooperate with the life of the family and what's going on.
Yeah.
So, like, if my daughter doesn't want to go to mass, I could come in like a tyrant and force her to go.
Yeah.
Or it's another thing to like faithfully go, and then she sees from how I live and how I act the value and importance of that, and then because that's really what I want. I want her to go and do the right thing because it's in her to do the right thing, and not just because I'm
Yes.
like pulling the strings.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that takes maturity, and I think it takes, I mean, for us, I know for me, as I think of my kids, especially when they're adults and they're 30 and they're coming back home and now they're staying with us and it's a Sunday morning. It's a very different game than when they were 12 or 13, when it was easier to not even have to be angry about it, to just be like, yeah, I know you don't want to go, and we're going, just get ready. We're going. I mean, it's
right.
But when they're adults, then that's what you're talking about. What does it look like to be a king in your family? And to know that a lot of times they're not going to go sometimes if that's not what they're doing, and that's not easy, but it's, and I think that's the other thing, I met a bunch of old high school buddies, and they're all Catholic. They went to a Catholic high school. They're all still Catholic. We're all 60-ish, and 6 guys sitting in a room where a friend of ours, another classmate, was playing in a band. So we just met for a drink. And of the 6 guys, 4 of them had kids who were either gay, and 3 gay and 1 transgender kid. And these are good Catholic guys. Like and it was, as we know, I mean, it's never easy for parents, and they were a little embarrassed. Like, if I must have done something, which is the common response, but it was so good to have this space, the safe space, to say, you know what, we do all we can. We live as kings. We honor God. We do our best. And then we have to realize that you can't control it all. And so
I really think actually, when I look at my own life and kind of thinking that through, like, where did I learn? I think I've gotten better as my kids have gotten older. My kids are just starting. I have 1 adult child, and my kids are going through, I don't have any little ones left anymore.
Yeah.
And I see that in myself, like, I've gotten a little bit better about how I handle that. And like, where did I learn that? Well, I learned that from my wife, who was constantly resisting my urge to be a tyrant. She's always not letting me be, and which annoys me, to be honest, but it has improved, helped me to see more clearly. But then also being in circles with other men and trying to do important things and do difficult things, being on the committee that's planning the men's conference, and and everyone has their own, and you can't just lay down this is how it shall be.
Yes.
Like, nobody's in charge when you're in a group of adult men. Like, nobody is, the final arbiter of what happens. You have to learn how to invite the right thing out of someone and not just lay down the law. That's not how you treat adults, and so being in an environment where you are learning how to interact with adults as adults, have friendships as adults, it kind of gives you a sense of what you're aiming for with your kids or with your wife. And
absolutely. No, that's good. And I think this is another version of iron sharpening iron, isn't it? Like, because you're actually having to learn in real time with real people. And again, this isn't online where you're commenting on a post or really taking a stand on Facebook. I mean, that's fine. Actually, I don't think it is fine, but to be in a group where you're actually interacting and watching people's in real time reactions and pushing forward an idea and watching people push back. And that's how we become human, isn't it? That's how we get formed as loving men who are not afraid to be courageous, but also are humble enough to do this relationally. And I think
that's great. I mean, I think that's right. And I think it's real helpful for those groups to have a focus, or have, you try to do something, to do something, and especially if it's try to do something that's difficult, try to do something that's not easy or maybe hasn't been done before. You don't have to wait for the bishop or the priest or somebody to tell you, okay, now do this. It's like, well, what is it that we think needs to be done, and how could we go about doing it?
Yeah.
When you start trying to do something, I think this happens with, a couple of guys who start a business up. They're having drinks and they're sketch something out on the back of a
Yeah.
napkin, but then they try to actually do it and they find out it's harder than they think,
Oh yeah.
and they have to, coordinate. And so, like, when men's groups start trying to do something difficult, like maybe they're trying to attend to prayer in a way that they haven't before, or maybe they're trying to do some service that the parish needs that hasn't been done before, or whatever, like start up something new, have that entrepreneurial spirit, then you realize you're in over your head real fast.
Yeah.
And you need your brothers. Then who's good at this, and I'm not good at that, and you are, and how do we coordinate that? You end up having to be a better version of yourself to succeed.
Isn't that great? Yeah. And sometimes sometimes the best moments of my life have been when I've completely blown it, or when I do get in over my head and I have to be humble and say, man, I really blew it this time. And then to realize you got these guys sitting around saying, yeah, that's okay. We still, we still care about you. Like, we'll still, we meeting again next week. Great. Let's meet next week. And you realize, I thought it was a catastrophe, but it's not. Like, we all do it. Like, it's too bad the Me Too movement was the Me Too movement, because it kind of ruined one of my favorite phrases, which is, oh, me too. Some days I wake up and I don't have faith, and I want faith, but I don't feel like I can believe. It's like, oh, you too, me too. Like, some days I wake up and I don't want to love anybody. I don't want to go to work. I just want to, like, whatever. It's like, oh, you too? Yeah, that's part of being a man.
Yeah.
Okay, well then I can do it. I will find a way. Maybe I'll call you on days when I feel that way, because you seem to know what I'm talking about, or whatever. We need each other. We really do. And I think people are forgetting. It's almost like we're forgetting it, and we don't know what's wrong. And so you look at people, why are people so lonely? Why are these diseases related to loneliness on the rise? Why is violence on the rise? Why is opioid addiction on the rise? Why are people, all these things that don't work? What works is people and relationships and humility and being kind with each other, So
why is religiosity in decline? Why are people not going to church? Why are people losing their faith in God? And
yes,
I think you made this point earlier to me about, we don't often as men enter into a place where we can share our faith together. I think we live in an environment where we assume that our faith or my relationship with God is just private and individual. And that's never been a Catholic view, right? That's, that our faith isn't a private thing. It's something that can only be expressed corporately or with other people together. You don't say mass all by yourself. Like, the priest doesn't say mass, strictly speaking, all by himself. Like, there has to be a congregation. There has to be a communion that's being shared.
Yes.
And we lose that. We tend to try to Lone Ranger our faith,
Isn't that something?
and try to live it out by ourselves. But the faith isn't private. It's important that we.
Well, it is. And I think, and one of the things I'll talk about at the conference is what you're describing is a theological anthropology. It's also psychology. Like, we become who we are through relationship. We are, we're created in the image of the Trinity, and the Trinity is three separate yet one. And we've all had that experience, like separate yet together. Like, if you have an old friend, you haven't seen in a while, you get together, you sit down, you get a beer, and you're like, wow, we're right. We picked up where we live inside each other. Like, we form each other. We're the average of our three closest friends. I mean, all that is neurologically true. And so we want to be careful. Like, we want to choose people that we want to be more like. We want to be in a group where we're enhancing each other's faith. And I know you've had that experience. I've had that experience at just the right time. I have a conversation with another Christian brother, and I can borrow his insight. I can borrow his strength, or he can pray for me. And that's what I need. I don't have it all. I can't do it all. I go think back at what I've been through with my kids, and without these other guys I was with, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, they, some of them were ahead with me, like their kids were, 5-10 years older than mine. And so they had wisdom. And so, that's super important. So I just love, and I just have to say that, Chris, I just love that you guys keep pouring into men's ministry, because it can be an uphill battle today. People are super busy. I'm sure there are guys who are listening to this who are still thinking, man, I could do so much. My kid's got a soccer game. I could do so much else. And it's so tempting to feel like I don't have time. But man, this hits a spot in the heart that nothing else is going to hit.
It pays dividends. It pays
Oh, yeah.
dividends, to do that because something emerges that couldn't emerge otherwise. It's like
I
singing a
agree.
song. It's like there's a difference between listening to music that you like and joining your voice into a song. Like when you sing, like
Yeah.
I say this every time, like one of the most, palpable, hard to describe, beautiful experiences of being in the men's conferences. You have, 800 guys in a room, 1,000 guys, however many come, and they all lift their voice together. They all say the Our Father, and like there's a line in the Exultet, which is the prayer that's sung during the Easter Vigil. At the very beginning of the Easter Vigil, that usually the deacon sings this very long song.
Yeah.
It's a praise to the Easter candle.
Yeah.
And it says, let this building shake with the sounds of the voice of the people.
Yeah.
And like how few people have experienced that. But you go to the men's conference and we just say, okay, Our Father who art in heaven. And we all just say, and it's 800 masculine male voices. And it feels like the building shakes. It feels like, and it's not like a particularly like a charismatic experience or something like that. It's just what happens when we all join our voice together in a single prayer. And then if we manage to sing together, there's a way in which that song can only emerge when everyone's joining their voice. And then that becomes symbolic of what the church can do in the city of New Orleans if we're joining our voice together, or we're coordinating and collaborating and not just seeking some kind of top-down strong man, someone's going to be in charge, but each man contributing what they have to contribute for and the church kind of comes alive. And that's why we're doing it. That's why we're doing it. And you can't, for those of you that are out there, like you can't experience that unless you're there. Like you have to be in the room.
So true. You can't get the talks on YouTube or whatever, wherever they're going to be posted. You can't get them and listen to them. You need to have that experience. And I would say this as a psychologist, neurologically, again, the neuropsychology of this is that our brain lights up in a certain way when we're with a group of people. And we actually neurologically will carry the other guys with us. We'll carry that vibration of everyone saying the Our Father and knowing I'm not alone. And you probably had this experience when I go on these silent meditation retreats. And so you probably spend, 15 hours of silence sitting in meditation at a retreat house. And I can feel it in me. Like I go to meditate a week later and I can feel the people I was with on retreat, knowing they're meditating too. It's real. It's not just like in your mind, it's in your nervous system. And especially if guys have something in their life that's heavy or difficult right now, there's things that can happen when you gather with a large group that aren't going to happen any other way. They're not even going to happen at Mass where you're not passively, but when you're sitting in Mass and participating. So no, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, so for all of you guys who are listening, the men's conference is February 24th. Dr. Tim Hogan's going to be one of our speakers. Thank you, Tim, for this time and for being willing to join in with this. From the very beginning, when I first I heard you speak at a conference we were at together, and from the first conversation we had, it's like, he's thinking right along the same lines. You're bringing something new. But it's really good to have a friend and someone who's walking the similar path. So thanks for what you're doing and for coming along and helping us out.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you. It's a real privilege to get to join you guys. I love the whole area of New Orleans, that whole Gulf Coast area. This will be like my third time down there, and I just love it. Yeah,
great.
Thank you.
So hey, how can people find you? Find your book? What you're about? Where can people find you? Yeah,
well, my website, which has some of my writing and all that, is drtimhogan.com, drtimhogan.com. So drtimhogan.com. And then the book is called The Gift of Cultural Hurricanes, and you can get it at Amazon, or you can go to culturalhurricane.com. But I think, going to Amazon, The Gift of Cultural Hurricanes, it'll come up.
Great.
And we'll have more at the conference. People hear a little bit more about all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Thank you, Chris.